today, let's talk about immunity. But first, what is immunity? So immunity is a way in which the body can protect itself from invasion by pathogenic microorganisms and provide a defense against their harmful effect. So there are two types of immunity. First is a non-specific immunity. Non-specific immunity are also called as natural or innate immunity. So it is the first line of defense against any infectious agent. So it provides an effective barrier that prevents the microorganisms from penetrating, and it inhibits or destroys the invader if it gains access to the tissue. And it eliminates or neutralizes any toxic substances elaborated by infectious agents. Under the non-specific immunity, there are two types. So first is the external defense system. So the external defense system is composed of physical, chemical, and biological barriers that function together to prevent most infectious agents from entering the body. An example of this is the skin, in which it acts as physical barrier to keep pathogens out. Even the openings in the skin, such as the mouth and eyes, are protected by saliva, mucus, and tears, which contain an enzyme that breaks down bacterial cell walls. Next type is the internal defense system. So internal defense system is composed of both cells and soluble factors that have specific and essential functions. An example of this is the inflammation, it is a localized response of injured tissues that destroys pathogens and promotes healing. And the non-specific immunity can be classified as species immunity, racial immunity, and individual immunity. For species immunity, when a given organism is capable of producing disease in one animal species and not in the others. So anatomic differences between species also determine species immunity. An example of this is birds are resistant to anthrax, but humans are susceptible. So it is simply because higher body temperature of birds kills Bacillus anthracis. Next classification is the racial immunity. So racial immunity is possessed by a race among one animal species that there may be difference in susceptibility. Racial immunity is determined by difference in socioeconomic status, habitat, culture, feeding habits, environments, and genetics. An example of this is a certain African race are more resistant to malaria and yellow fever, whereas the Asian or Americans are susceptible to same infection. Next is the individual immunity. Person-to-person differences in susceptibility. Individual immunity is determined by various factors such as the health status, nutritional status, previous illness, and personal hygiene, and the genetic differences. An example of which is individual with genetic deficiency of glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase are resistant to malaria. And the next type of immunity is the specific immunity. Specific immunity are also called as acquired or adaptive immunity, the defense system that protects the body against pathogenic organisms and other type of diseases such as cancer. So it allows the body to recognize, remember, and respond to a specific stimulus and antigen. This condition of memory or recall, acquired resistance, allows the host to respond more effectively if reinfection with the same microorganism occurs. So there are types of specific immunity. So first is the active immunity. So active immunity is antibodies are produced from the individual's own immune system in response to foreign antigen. So under the active immunity is a naturally acquired active immunity. So immunity that comes from infectious encountered in daily life. So an example of this is an individual who recovers from a first case of measles is immune to further infection. Next is the artificially acquired active immunity. So artificially acquired active immunity is stimulated by initial exposure to specific foreign macromolecules through the use of vaccines to artificially establish a state of immunity. An example of which is the BCG vaccine for tuberculosis disease. And then the other type for specific immunity is a passive immunity. So passive immunity is antibodies produced elsewhere are given to individual. So under the passive immunity is the naturally acquired passive immunity. So antibodies transferred from mother to fetus, across the placenta, and to the newborn in colostrum and breast milk during the first few months of life. So examples of this natural acquired passive immunity is the placental transfer of IgG from mother to fetus during pregnancy that generally lasts for 4 to 6 months after birth, and the IgA and the IgG found in human colostrum and milk of babies who are nursed. And the last type is the artificially acquired passive immunity. So introduction of antibodies that are formed by animal or an human to an individual to prevent or treat infection. So an example of this is the rabies vaccine and the snake anti-venom. So that's all about the immunity, and I hope you've learned something.